Hi, my name is Christian Maynard. I'm working on my PhD at Washington State University in sociology. I study cannabis use in adolescence. Today, we'll examine some of the claims made by an anti-cannabis video on YouTube.
Here's a medical miracle for you. A drug that relieves pain, reduces anxiety, improves your mood, and has no side effects. Too good to be true?
I mean, I don't know who's saying that it has no side effects. I mean, those are literally side effects that you just mentioned.
Well, millions of Americans believe that drug is marijuana. Are they right? I'm a physician, board-certified internist, and addiction medicine specialist. I've treated thousands of people whose addictions to opiates, alcohol, and other drugs were wrecking their relationships, their careers, and their lives.
I mean, just like most things, it can be abused.
I'm telling you, marijuana can be both harmful and addictive, just like many other substances. What I've seen firsthand for 20 years is now becoming obvious to other doctors and researchers. Increased use of marijuana is leading to increased psychosis, bipolar mania, and even spontaneous vomiting, especially in adolescents and young adults.
Let's examine this claim. It seems like the goal here is to reduce adolescent use, which, fair. Good goal, right? Well, wouldn't that mean that we actually push for policies that would regulate this substance? So, according to several articles, the prevalence of cannabis use for adolescents after legalization goes down. So here, Dilly, we can find that they use the Healthy Youth Survey, and they find a decrease in adolescent use. Another study by Anderson used the Youth Risk Behavior Surveys. Anderson finds that medical marijuana laws were not statistically associated with marijuana use, but recreational marijuana laws were actually associated with a decrease in use and 9% decrease in odds of frequent marijuana use. Another study by Midget that used state-level representative data and compared that to nationally representative data sources like Monitoring the Future found that there was a decrease in cannabis use after legalization for grades 8 and 10. In addition, let's take a look at adolescent use. So, national survey trends by Monitoring the Future indicate that cannabis use has remained mostly stable or decreased in recent years. Here we see the 1970s and 80s, the 90s and early 2000s, and recent legalization. Let's continue.
The younger the user, the less developed their brain, the more harmful the drug. Hate to burst your bubble, but that is the science. A 2022 Gallup survey found 30% of Americans between 18 and 34 use marijuana. When scientists at the University of Michigan asked young adults between 19 and 30 if they'd used it within the past month, 29% said yes in 2021, compared to 21% in 2016 and 17% in 2011. Daily marijuana use across all ages nearly doubled from 6% in 2011.
Except for adolescents, as I showed earlier. And some of the largest gains are actually among the older population, such as 65 plus.
11 to 11% in 2021. That translates into over 13 million Americans compared with 5 million in the decade before. There's no such thing as a bad drug. They are just molecules that affect human physiology.
You also have the potential difference in more people feeling okay to speak openly about their use, considering it's no longer criminalized in many states at the state level.
Most Americans use some form of a recreational substance, but ignoring or denying potential adverse effects creates a potential for serious harm. There's no free lunch with Mother Nature, so there are always side effects. My goal here is not to shame or scare anyone, but to raise awareness so you can make informed decisions. Speaking of that, keep in mind that marijuana has gone corporate. According to Forbes, legal marijuana is now a $20 billion industry and growing. There's a lot of vested interest in making sure you don't hear the bad news.
So let's look at the current cannabis industry, or at least some of the updates in 2025. So yes, the cannabis industry was 37 billion in 2021, but recently has decreased down to 11 billion. Much of it is there's quite a bit of supplies, so prices are diving down. Moreover, the 280E restriction often means that very few businesses actually make money. The margins are extremely small in this industry. Let's continue.
But there are risks. And the more you use and the higher the concentrations, the more the risk. Of course, most people who use marijuana won't have a psychotic break, develop bipolar disorder, or become schizophrenic, just as most people who drink don't develop alcoholic liver disease or alcohol dementia. Some individuals, and not a small number, will have a significant reaction to marijuana, and there's no way to know in advance. You won't know until it happens, and then it might be too late. It wasn't always like this. The marijuana people use today is not the weed of my generation. It hasn't been for at least 2 decades. What changed? The answer is found in 3 letters: THC. THC, or tetrahydrocannabinol.
The THC potency has increased, and let me bring out a chart. This is a study, changes in cannabis potency over the last 2 decades, 1995, 2014. And let's find the chart. Authors have found that THC potency has went from around 4% to roughly 12% in 2014. Let's continue.
Cannabinol, the main psychoactive or mind-altering component of cannabis. It's what gets you high. Keith Humphreys, a Stanford University professor of psychiatry and drug policy advisor to Presidents Bush and Obama, testified to a Rhode Island State Senate committee that THC concentrations had increased from 3% in the 80s up to over 20% in 2017. According to the New York Times in 2023, that figure is now nearing 100% THC, a 30-fold increase.
Concentrates can reach pretty high levels, but by and large, the research I've seen, users will tend to use less of it when it's concentrated, just to get the same effect. Moreover, I want to discuss the potency labeling for these products. Oftentimes, the way this market has seemingly worked is big number equals awesome, right? Like, oh, you want that 90% THC, you want that 30, not necessarily, but I'm saying this might be a marketing ploy. And instead, studies have found that the testing that's being done at these labs are not necessarily being overinflated, but cultivators may shop around for labs that test products, and maybe they find one that makes their product look even stronger. According to this article, uncomfortably high testing reveals inflated THC potency on retail cannabis labels. You can see that THC levels might be nearly double of what's actually observed in the THC in the cannabis. Let's continue.
And as the stuff gets stronger, so do its effects. The 2021 National Survey on Drug Use and Health found that among the 52 million Americans 12 and older who used marijuana in the past month, 16 million were addicted. So nearly 1/3 of users can't quit, at least not without help, despite
the guideline for addiction that they're using is cannabis use disorder, which let me put that up here. So cannabis use disorder is something that affects about 30% of people who use cannabis. And these are the following signs that you have cannabis use disorder: using more cannabis than intended, trying but failing to quit using cannabis, spending a lot of time using cannabis, craving cannabis, using cannabis even though it causes problems at home, school, or work, continuing to use cannabis despite social and relationship problems, giving up important activities with friends and family in favor of using cannabis in high-risk situations such as driving a car, continuing to use cannabis despite physical or psychological problems and needing to use more cannabis to get the same high. Quite a few signs that you could have a cannabis use disorder. So a lot of categories to get caught up in.
The drug's negative effects on their lives. In 2023, JAMA Psychiatry published a study of marijuana habits among 6.5 million Danes over the age of 16. The study found that marijuana addicts were twice as likely as non-users to be diagnosed with clinical depression and up to 4 times as likely to develop bipolar disorder with psychotic symptoms. A study in Norway, also published in 2023, concluded that among people who had no pre-existing mental health issues who'd had a psychotic incident after using marijuana, 27% develop what has been characterized as schizophrenia. Are you with me? 1 out of 4 perfectly healthy people who started using marijuana on a regular basis developed a severe mental disorder. Some of them were my patients. 2 of them were my...
There's a huge difference between association and causation, and much of the study on the mental health effects, it's hard to disentangle the environment that people grew up in, or the types of people who do use cannabis might also be the types of people who are more likely to develop certain mental health issues. One study in the Addiction Journal, exploring the association between cannabis use and depression, back in 2003, stated that yes, potentially could be associated, especially heavier use and earlier you use it, that is more detrimental to one's life outcomes in the long term. However, the science showed that it was too early to rule out the hypothesis that association is due to, like I said, the people who are using cannabis might also be the same type of people who are experiencing these other factors that are associated with depression. Another study, the association between cannabis use and depression, a systematic review and meta-analysis of longitudinal studies, published 2013, so a bit more updated. This study found that the odds for cannabis users developing depression compared to non-users with controls was 1.17, and for heavy cannabis users, that was 1.62. compared to those non-users or light users. Research by Feingold, Cannabis and Depression, they state there's preclinical evidence that alteration in the endocannabinoid system could potentially benefit patients suffering from depression. So I think what is needed here is more science, and perhaps that's what rescheduling to Schedule 3, the recent decision by the Trump administration, will do.
My family members. 1 developed an addiction, 1 psychosis. They're now both fine but required treatment. They are among the lucky ones. But others weren't so lucky. Joshua Jimenez started using at 14 and was hospitalized 3 times for marijuana-induced psychosis. He committed suicide in 2021. He was 22. Kevin Bright was 15 when he started using marijuana to allegedly self-medicate for depression. 3 years later, he suffered his first psychotic break. He ended his life.
Again, you're using examples of adolescence here, and this is where I'm going to suggest that we look at the science of what legalization and regulation can do here and make it more inaccessible to adolescents.
At 29. Joshua and Kevin are not simply anecdotes. A 2023 JAMA study found that cannabis-linked attempted suicides have increased at an average rate of 17% a year. Still want to take that miracle drug that relieves pain, reduces anxiety, improves your mood, and has no side effects? I'm Dr. Drew Pinsky for Prager University.
I found that they emphasize a relatively small group of people who do have issues with cannabis and did not highlight the different harms that came from the current approach to regulating cannabis. It seems odd that they did not discuss legalization in this discussion on the effects that it could have on cannabis access. That seems kind of important. I also think it's misleading to make the claim that it increased among nearly all age groups while leaving out the fact that the young users, the ones that we are definitely concerned about, are the ones who their use is actually going down recently. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support my work, you can like the video, comment something, get subscribed. And if you'd like to support me directly, I do have a Patreon. Thank you so much. Have a great day.